Hello, and welcome to The Point of View, where we give our students a place to listen, learn, and lean in. We're your hosts, Zara, Avi, and Thomas, and today we'll be talking about immigration policies in 2025.
Immigration policy. It's a subject that simultaneously defines, divides, and confounds American politics. For over a century, it's been debated endlessly by politicians, by economics, by the media, to by just about anyone with an opinion. It's one of those topics where everyone seems to have a solution, yet no one ever actually solves it. That's because, in America, immigration isn't just about policy or borders. It's about competing narratives, security versus compassion, control versus opportunity, nationalism versus globalism. And nowhere has this tension been more apparent than over the past 16 years across the Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations. In that time, immigration policy has become a pendulum. Each new president pushes it in a radically different direction, only for their successor to swing it back. So how did this happen? Why is immigration in America so volatile? To answer that, we have to go back to 2009, where this story begins. Chapter 1, Obama and the Balancing Act. When Barack Obama took office, the nation was in crisis. The Great Recession was in full swing, unemployment was skyrocketing, businesses were collapsing, and millions of Americans were struggling just to get by. Naturally, immigration reform wasn't at the top of the new administration's priority list. But for millions of undocumented immigrants living in the shadows, there was hope. Obama had campaigned a promise to fix the country's broken immigration system, and that system was very broken. At the time, there was an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S. Many had lived there for years, some for decades. They worked in agriculture, constructions, hospitality, jobs that were vital to the economy but offered no legal protections. Without reform, they had no pathway to legal status and lived under the constant threat of deportation. But getting reform through Congress wasn't going to be so easy. Immigration was, and still is, a deeply polarizing issue. And with the political climate becoming more partisan by the day, Obama knew he needed a strategy. So, in an effort to build trust with conservatives, he chose to emphasize enforcement first. Between 2009 and 2011, Obama's administration ramped up deportations. And when I say ramped up, I mean a lot. Over his 8 years in office, more than 2.5 million undocumented immigrants were deported, more than any other president in U.S. history. Critics called him the deporter-in-chief, arguing that he had betrayed immigrant communities. But the administration defended the policy, saying it was focused on removing criminals and national security threats. This wasn't just about enforcement for its own sake. It was part of a broader political gamble. Thinking if the administration showed they were serious about border security, they could win Republican support for comprehensive immigration reform. And for a brief moment, it seemed like that might actually work. In 2013, a bipartisan group of senators, the Gang of Eight, introduced a sweeping immigration reform bill. This bill would have increased border security, expanded the visa system, and more importantly, provided a 13-year pathway to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrants. It passed the Senate with 68 votes, a rare display of bipartisan cooperation in today's hyper-partisan Congress. But that was as far as it went. The bill reached the House of Representatives, where it was promptly buried by then-Speaker John Boehner, who refused to bring it to a vote. Immigration reform was dead, again. This left Obama with few options. In 2012, he issued an executive order known as Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. This policy protected undocumented immigrants who have been brought to the U.S. as children, known as Dreamers, from deportation. It also allowed them to apply for work permits, though it didn't offer a pathway to citizenship. For Dreamers, this was life-changing. Suddenly, they could build futures without living in constant fear. But there was a catch. Because DACA was implemented through executive action, it could be revoked by any future president. And that's exactly what would happen just a few years later. Chapter 2. Trump and the hardline approach. Donald Trump's rise to the presidency was built in large part on anti-immigration rhetoric. From the moment he announced his candidacy, he portrayed immigration, especially illegal immigration, as threats to the national security. His campaign promised 3 major changes: build the wall, ban immigrants from certain countries, and crack down on border crossings. And once in office, Trump wasted no time. One of his first major actions was the travel ban, an executive order that barred entry to travelers from 7 predominantly Muslim countries. The order sparked chaos. Travelers were detained at airports across the country, protests erupted, and legal challenges flooded in. Over the next year, multiple court rulings blocked the ban, until a revised version was eventually upheld by the Supreme Court in 2018. But that was just the beginning. In 2018, Trump's administration implemented a zero-tolerance policy at the US-Mexico border. Under this policy, anyone caught crossing the border illegally was prosecuted. Because US law prohibits detaining children with their parents in criminal facilities, this led to mass family separations. Thousands of children were sent to detention centers, images of which quickly became a global scandal. Under intense pressure, Trump eventually reversed the policy, but by then, the damage was done. Trump's administration also tried to end DACA, arguing that Obama had overstepped his authority by creating it through executive order. The legal battle that followed culminated in a 2020 Supreme Court ruling, which blocked Trump's attempt to dismantle the program, at least temporarily. Meanwhile, Trump's signature campaign promise, the border wall, faced its own challenges. Congress repeatedly refused to fund the project, leading to a record-breaking government shutdown. Eventually, Trump declared a national emergency to redirect military funds. By the end of his term, about 450 miles of new or upgraded barriers had been constructed, far less than what he had promised. Chapter 3: Joe Biden and the Pendulum Swing. When Joe Biden took office in 2021, he immediately set out to undo many of Trump's policies. On his first day, he signed executive orders ending the travel ban and creating a task force to reunite separated families. He also reaffirmed his commitment to protecting DACA. But just as Biden sought to turn the page, a familiar challenge resurfaced: a surge in migration at the southern border. Thousands of asylum seekers fleeing violence and poverty in Central America began arriving in record numbers. This put enormous strain on U.S. border facilities and reignited political tensions. One of the most controversial policies Biden kept in place was Title 42, a public health order that allowed for the rapid expulsion of migrants during the COVID-19 pandemic. Although immigrant advocates pushed for its repeal, the administration argued it was necessary to control the spread of the virus. Despite Biden's efforts, his push for comprehensive immigration reform has stalled in Congress. The political gridlock remains as entrenched as ever. Chapter 4: A Broken System. Across these three administrations, one thing becomes clear: U.S. immigration policy is caught in a cycle of instability. Executive orders are issued, challenged, reversed, and reissued. Legislative reform remains elusive, and for the millions of immigrants affected by these policies, the stakes couldn't be higher.
The present Trump-era immigration policies. Before Trump's policy changes, any migrant that arrived at the United States border used to have the right to legally seek asylum within the United States itself. Trump also stopped the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program and another Biden-era program that allowed 30,000 migrants per month. In addition to this, Trump's policy from his first term, titled Remain in Mexico, which forced non-Mexican asylum seekers to wait for their asylum claims were resolved, has been reinstated. This resulted in multiple families being held in Mexico, regardless on if they're familiar with the country or not, enabling criminal gangs to prey on those new migrants. Mix that with the fact that he canceled an app made during the Biden administration that allowed easier methods of appointment creation, canceling tons of appointments early, and families were unfortunately left stranded in Mexico. In addition to these changes, immigration officers across the United States have begun to make more arrests. These numbers spiked in major cities, such as Atlanta and Chicago, as a result of Trump expanding arrest priorities to include anyone in the United States illegally, instead of just the previous policy of it just being those with criminal convictions. Another important change to the immigration policies made by Donald Trump is his order to end birthright citizenship, the 14th Amendment. As of speaking, this has not been enacted yet. However, should this go through, tons of current American citizens would have their citizenship revoked without any other country's citizenship to rely on.
Mass deportation involves the removal of a large number of undocumented immigrants from the United States. This policy has been proposed as a means to address illegal immigration and its associated challenges. However, it's essential to examine both the potential benefits and the significant drawbacks of such an approach. Immigrants have long been integral to America's economic fabric. They bring diverse skills, entrepreneurial spirit, and a strong work ethic. According to the Migration Policy Institute, immigrants boost overall economic growth by expanding the labor force and increasing consumer spending. They also start new businesses at a higher rate than U.S.-born individuals, contributing significantly to innovation and job creation. However, it's essential to recognize the potential challenges that arise when immigration is restricted. Several industries are already grappling with significant labor shortages. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce reports that sectors like hospitality, food services, transportation, and retail trade have a high demand for in-person work, with nearly 80% of staff required on site. In the hospitality sector, for instance, the absence of immigrant workers can lead to service delays, reduced operating hours, and even temporary closures, directly impacting revenue and customer satisfaction. The manufacturing industry is also facing a potential labor crisis. A study by the Manufacturing Institute projects a shortage of 2.1 million skilled workers by 2030, primarily due to a lack of qualified labor. Beyond these sectors, immigrants play a pivotal role in disaster recovery efforts. The Guardian highlights that immigration crackdown could disrupt rebuilding processes after natural disasters, as many skilled workers in this field are immigrants. The Economic Policy Institute emphasizes that immigrants are crucial in sustaining economic growth, especially as the native-born population ages and the number of prime-age working adults declines. To conclude, immigrants are not just participants in the U.S. economy. They are vital contributors to its growth and resilience. Restrictive immigration policies could exacerbate labor shortages, hinder disaster recoveries, and slow economic progress. It's imperative to recognize and support the invaluable role that immigrants play in sustaining and enhancing our nation's economic well-being. There's also some advantages that we might get from mass deportation in an overall whole country perspective. There are some things like job availability for U.S. citizens, reduced strain on public services, and enhanced national security. For job availability, proponents argue that removing undocumented workers could open up employment opportunities for American citizens, particularly in low-skilled sectors. This could potentially reduce unemployment rates among native-born workers. Another thing is that supporters suggest that mass deportation could alleviate the burden on public services such as healthcare, education, and welfare programs, leading to potential cost savings for federal, state, and local governments. For instance, states and localities have incurred significant expenses providing services to undocumented immigrants. New York City has spent over $5.5 billion during this crisis. And also, some advocates believe that deporting undocumented individuals, especially those with criminal records, could enhance national security and public safety by reducing crime rates and potential threats.
Immigration in America is a reflection of its values that are constantly in tension: security versus opportunity, exclusion versus inclusion. Until those tensions are resolved, the pendulum will keep swinging, and millions of lives will hang in the balance. This is the story of modern American immigration, a story defined by politics, power, and the people caught in between.
This concludes this episode of Immigration Policies in 2025. Thank you so much for listening. For a transcript of this episode, head to the Point of View tab on our website, nhsmessenger.org, and follow us on Instagram, X, and Facebook at nhspointview for updates and new episodes. I'm your host, Zara.
Avi.
Thomas.
And this has been Point of View.